What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of Pistons Daily, where you can find daily content covering all things Detroit Pistons every single day. I'm your host. My name is Kyle Garrison. I'm over on Twitter at Kyle Garrison2, where I talk all things Detroit sports. So come on over, say hello, give me comments, questions, concerns, episode ideas. I'd love to hear from you guys. Also, we are just 2 weeks into the channel and already hit 1,000 subscribers. So once again, thank you guys so much for all the support, for tuning in every single day. It's been unbelievable watching the channel grow. So thank you, and let's dive right into today's video. So the first thing I want to talk about is Duncan Robinson, what I don't like, what I do like about the signing, and then I'll just dive into Tim Hardaway Jr., what his departure means for the long-term plans of the team. And then I want to talk about the roster, what it looks like after 2 days of free agency, some lineups I envision. And then before we wrap things up, I'll talk about some of the comments that I saw on yesterday's video, and I'll give my thoughts on those. But first things first, let's talk about Duncan Robinson. The former Michigan Wolverine, another former Michigan Wolverine the Pistons added, along with Caris LeVert. Tim Hardaway Jr. did leave, so we lost one, but we gained two. Not mad about it. I'm a big Michigan fan, so I watch Duncan Robinson. I love the shooting he brings, but what I don't like right off the rip is he is horrible defensively. One of the worst defenders in the league, if not the worst defender. And there was times in Miami where he couldn't play because he was such a liability. And I understand. I mean, you can't have a guy out there who can't guard anybody. It's simple as that. But I do think in a more limited role where he's not asked to defend a starter, he's going to thrive with that. In Miami, there was a lot of times where he was starting and he was having to guard a third or fourth option on a good team, and it just wasn't working out. He would get blown by. He's not quick with his feet whatsoever. So if you're asking him to guard a guy who is a 20 point per game scorer who can score at all three levels, that's just not going to work. But if you ask him to guard another bench player from another team, then maybe that evens things out a little bit. But at the end of the day, a counter argument to that is Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. are not great defensively in their own right. So nobody that they brought in this year was going to be a 3-and-D guy. Nickeil Alexander-Walker was really the only option, and Atlanta picked him up really quickly and offered him a long-term deal, which clearly the Pistons didn't want to do. So they were kind of stuck with either Tim Hardaway Jr. or Duncan Robinson. And again, neither of those players are great defenders. Malik Beasley was going to be their option, also not a great defender. Obviously, Malik and Tim are better laterally. They can move quicker laterally and guard quicker guards, but they weren't great at it by any means. So Duncan Robinson's defense is definitely going to be a question mark, and we're going to have to keep tabs on that. But it'll just be a matter if his three-point volume, if he's hitting at a high clip and he's really spacing the floor, does that overshadow his defensive liability? Only time will tell. But another thing I don't like is just he's on the older side. But again, any complaint I have about him, it can also be applied to Tim Hardaway Jr. He's also on the older side as well. So again, maybe Tim Hardaway Jr. was a little bit cheaper, but I think Duncan Robinson just gives you better upside, especially in the playoffs shooting. There's some numbers I'll bring up here in a second, but I do want to dive into what I like overall about Duncan. And first things first, this might be a hot take, but the contract is not as bad as I originally thought. First of all, you were able to get rid of Simone Fontecchio in the sign-in trade, which is good. A lot of us did not want to see Simone minutes at all next year, and so you were able to get off his $8.5 million that he was owed this year. Duncan is a 3-year, $48 million contract, so it's $16 million. It's double what Simone was getting paid, but there is a partial guarantee on year 2, and year 3 is not guaranteed at all. So obviously, yeah, $48 million over 3 years is a lot for a guy that's maybe only going to play 15 minutes a night. But when you look at overall the future of this team, the flexibility with trades, having a middle tier contract, especially annually at $16 million, is pretty nice because a lot of the Pistons contracts were either rookie deals or they were $30 million plus deals like Tobias and Cade. The only real middle tier contract you had was Isaiah Stewart, which is around $15 million a year. But now you have Caris LeVert and you have Duncan Robinson, who are making around $16-15 million a year. So if you do want to go out and make a splash, you don't automatically have to give up Isaiah Stewart. You can give up Duncan Robinson and Caris LeVert, or you can do a combination of things. I'm just speculating at this point, but it just does make you more versatile in the trade market. So if the Pistons are buying at the deadline, they start the year off really strong, Jaden Ivey comes back and looks like what he looked like early on last year, then you might be able to buy at the trade deadline and go out and get somebody good where you don't have to give up a ton of assets, but just rather some middle tier contracts like Duncan Robinson and Caris LeVert. So at the end of the day, having a guy who it's 1 year guaranteed $16 million, dollars, and then each year after that it goes down, it's not that bad. It could be a lot worse. And if he does well if he does well this year, then you can bring him back on the second year, which is only partially guaranteed. So you can offer him the full amount, or you cannot, and you can let him walk like the Heat did this year. So it just brings some more variety, and I like the signing overall. I don't think that it's going to really hurt you in the long term with your checkbook and future free agency signings or being able to extend some of your players. I don't think that's going to be the case, but rather just give you the option to make some trades later down the line. But as a player, one thing that really stands out to me that I like is the dribble handoff action that he had with Bam Adebayo was unbelievable. And I think that Jalen Duren can start to replicate that. I know I've talked about Bam Adebayo and how I'd like to see Jalen Duren kind of become more of a Bam Adebayo type player. I know I don't want him to be Bam Adebayo because there's a ton of flaws in his game, but a similar player where he is comfortable operating from the 3-point line, from the high post, from the free throw line, areas like that, because JD clearly right now is just a rim running center. But if you bring a guy like Duncan Robinson, who's really, really good in the dribble handoff action, that can allow Jalen Duren to operate a little bit higher up towards the 3-point line and just open up the floor a lot more, especially if you have Asar Thompson on the floor, because then he can be in that dunker spot. He can be that kind of lob threat while Jalen Duren is operating that dribble handoff. So I like Duncan Robinson's ability off ball. I really do. I think he's got some talent there, and Miami definitely geared their offense to allow him to succeed. So I could see the Pistons second unit, and Isaiah Stewart could be another guy who's operating that pick and roll / dribble handoff with Duncan Robinson that just gives him more space. So I think that's a really big key to his game that the Pistons must have seen and liked. And then, like I said, he does move very well off ball, which is really nice. He draws a ton of attention on defense. There was times where you could see guys face guarding him off ball because of the threat he posed. I know I talked about it yesterday, and that's a key factor. That's a big piece because with guys like Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, Ron Holland, Cade Cunningham, who are all just athletic, can get downhill. That's really nice to have a guy who can sit in the corner and understands his role like Duncan Robinson does. So I like the signing overall. I think we're just going to have to see how he plays out. If the defense starts to get better, if he starts to look more comfortable as a bench player, then maybe you end up signing him again next year or extending him or whatnot. And I think it's a good option going forward. And also with the Tim Hardaway Jr. departure, you needed a spot-up shooter. You really did overall. And one thing that really stands out to me why I think Tim Hardaway Jr. or why Duncan Robinson is an upgrade over Tim Hardaway Jr. is something that stood out to me. Duncan Robinson in 70 career playoff games averaged splits of 44, 40, 86. In 48 career playoff games, Tim Hardaway Jr. has splits of 37, 33, 68. And Duncan Robinson's at a 60% career playoff effective field goal percentage, and Tim Hardaway Jr. is at a 47 playoff effective field goal percentage in his career. So clearly on higher volume, Duncan Robinson is much better in the playoffs. I think a lot of the complaints about Tim Hardaway Jr. was last year in the playoffs, he just wasn't good. He took 52 threes. He made 16 of them. That is just over 30%. I think it's 30.7%. So clearly Duncan Robinson is a better three-point shooter when the defense is more intense, when the closeouts are better, when the players are just clearly giving more effort on the defensive end. Duncan Robinson can still be a high-volume shooter who his efficiency doesn't dip from the regular season to the postseason like we saw with Tim Hardaway Jr. So again, Tim Hardaway Jr., I hope that he has success in Denver. I hope he plays significant minutes, and I wish the best for him, but it was time for him to move on. I think that it was just a 1 year. One year in Detroit was good enough, and we wish him the best. Hopefully he finds some success in Denver as a bench piece. I don't think he's ever going to be a starter again in this league, but he gave us great minutes, and I love the intensity he brought. He consistently gave effort. He drew charges, put his body on the line. So shout out to Tim Hardaway Jr., but we got Duncan Robinson now, another Michigan guy, so we're happy. And moving on, let's just talk about the roster before we wrap things up. We'll talk about comments too, but we'll just briefly talk about the roster, what it's looking like after day 2 of free agency. Obviously, the two big additions, Caris LeVert, Duncan Robinson. The only person they brought back was Paul Reed, who, again, third center, just a veteran guy, not going to give you many minutes, maybe in the regular season a little bit here and there if there's injuries, but for the point guard position, we've got Cade, obviously, shooting guard Jaden Ivey. The starters are going to be the same, Asar, Tobias, Duren. But with the bench, Marcus Sasser opens up more of a role as the backup point guard. Clearly, the front office values him and his long-term upside. I think he can be a good spot-up shooter off the bench with Karis LeVert, kind of being that combo guard that can facilitate, also play off ball. So I expect Marcus Sasser and Karis LeVert to work well off of each other. I do like that Karis LeVert's 6'6", a little bit longer. I talked about it yesterday. Marcus Sasser and Dennis Schroeder on the floor at the same time was never going to really work. But if you have a guy who's more versatile as a defender like Karis LeVert, who's longer, just has more length overall, that can allow Marcus Sasser to play. So I like that. I like that backcourt duo. I think that's going to be really solid for Marcus Sasser's development, is having a guy who can play on ball, and he doesn't have to really, and Marcus Sasser doesn't have to really be that primary ball handler off the bench. Although he can do it at sometimes, I'm sure him and Karis will switch off, but that should be a fun backup unit. And then Duncan Robinson, obviously the backup 3 volume shooter, can give you good minutes off the bench. I see him playing a similar role to somebody like Tim Hardaway Jr. last year. I don't think he'll start, but he could be playing 22 to 26 minutes a night, just giving you high volume, giving you good minutes offensively. But again, his limitations lie on the defensive end, so it's just going to depend on him. If he can improve defensively and he can not be a liability when he's on the floor, that'll open up a ton more minutes for him and a ton more opportunity on this team, where you really are going to want to surround Cade Cunningham with as much shooting as you possibly can. It worked last year. I can't imagine it wouldn't work again. So I like that addition. I think we were a little bit skeptical about the contract overall, but as we've kind of dissected it and realized the potential with it, it's not too bad. The only place that I would probably like to see some additions be made is maybe at the backup power forward, Ron Holland. He's more of a wing. I don't really want to force him to have to guard bigger power forwards and play that 4 position. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how his role plays out, if he's going to be more of a wing off of the bench or if he's going to be playing in that backup power forward. So I do expect maybe an addition there. Obviously, with the way free agency's gone, nothing is certain. So if Ron Holland ended up being your starting or your backup power forward, then, so be it. I think he can play that role decently well, and especially as he kind of grows into his body, gets stronger, there's going to be some potential for him there, but I don't know how realistic it is to have, a 6'7" wing be your backup power forward. But we'll just have to see how the roster kind of turns out. Obviously, we're just 2 days into free agency, so many different things could happen. And then the center depth, we talked about it. Duren, Isaiah Stewart, that's going to kind of be your duo going forward in the future. I'm happy about it. I like it. I think Isaiah Stewart's going to come back with vengeance this year. Hopefully he can stay healthy into the playoffs, because he's somebody we really could have used. But I like having those two. I think that they complement each other well. They do different things. They have different skill sets. So I think that's going to be a fun duo going forward. And let's just move on to some comments. We'll talk about, obviously, the rotation as it kind of builds itself out, and whether Chaz Lanier is going to get minutes, or just kind of what that looks. Bobby Klitman as well, another guy that could potentially sneak into the rotation. So we'll just have to see going forward. But one of the comments from Matt Williams 5584 that I liked was, he said, "Ugh, this is what not having a strong offseason planning looks like. Pistons should see if Ivy would take a somewhat team-friendly extension at this point." And I agree. It's been an underwhelming offseason with the Malik Beasley situation. That really threw a wrench into the plans. But it does open up flexibility for the Jalen Duren and the Jaden Ivey extensions. We expect those to happen. I think everybody in this fan base wants them to be extended, because if they do, that means they really showed out this year, and they played significantly better than they have in the past. I mean, both players are very solid, but we're going to need to see some improvement on the defensive end. And if we do, they're going to have to be extended. And with an underwhelming offseason and not really going out and giving a guy like Nickeil Alexander-Walker a 4-year deal, you open up the flexibility to re-sign Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson, Jaden Ivey, some of those younger guys who are still on their rookie deals. So we just kind of need to all settle down and relax. There's probably a method to Trajan Langdon's madness, I would hope. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that he wants to bring back his young guys. And then another comment that I liked was from Joe Jams 9737. He said, "I hope this is the year that Sasser can break out with the second team and we can play Karis and him as a dual point guard shooting guard to keep the opponent guessing on defense." And I talked about it before, but yeah, I like that. I like Sasser being able to come off the bench and play with a bigger wing like Karis LeVert, who can also handle the ball. I think that's going to be really fun to watch. There's a lot of potential just with the rotations. You could play Marcus Sasser and Jaden Ivey at the same time. You could have Cade and Marcus. You could have Cade and Karis. There is some flexibility with those 4 players. We'll see if Chaz Lanier kind of breaks into that. But yeah, Joe Jams, shout out to you for the comment. It is going to be really fun to kind of watch how Marcus Sasser is able to play off Karis LeVert, a good veteran guy that I think will complement Marcus Sasser's game. But that's really all I've got for you guys today. Let me know in the comments or over on Twitter your thoughts on the Pistons signing Duncan Robinson and if you think he's an upgrade over Tim Hardaway Jr. Also, let me know if you think the Pistons still need to add a backup for this offseason, and if so, who you'd like to see Trajan go after. And as always, like, subscribe, comment, turn on post notifications, and follow me on Twitter over at Kyle Garrison too. Once again, thank you guys so much for 1,000 subscribers. The channel is growing at an insane rate, and it's all thanks to you guys. With that being said, that's going to do it here for episode 14 of Pistons Daily, and I will catch you all next time.